Good morning. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here this morning to the William G. McGowan Theater, whether you're here in person or joining us via live stream for this very important multi-agency forum on using the Freedom of Information Act to access immigration records. And a special thanks to Jill Eggleston, the Associate Center Director of the FOIA PA branch of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, for suggesting this event and for all of her work in putting together today's forum. As the nation's record keeper, the holdings of the National Archives include historical immigration records, ships, passenger list, passport applications that help researchers and historians develop a true understanding of who we are as a nation and allow especially genealogists to create and understand complex family trees. We have the records of the Citizen and Immigration Services, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration Customs Enforcement, much in the news these days, and all represented here on today's panel. The National Archives is also the home of the FOIA Ombudsman, the Office of Government Information Services, or OGIS. Through their work, we're keenly aware of the importance of gaining access through FOIA to records maintained by various agencies that manage the immigration system. OGIS is regularly contacted by requesters, including experienced researchers and immigration attorneys who are confused about how to use FOIA to access immigration. So let's eliminate any confusion that you may have. I want to thank today's participants for sharing your insights into the kinds of records your agencies hold, how best to access these records, and to help citizens understand how to use the FOIA process to gain access to important records at various agencies. And I look forward to hearing about the insights that are generated during this forum and appreciate your attendance and interest in today's program. And now I'll turn it back to Alina, who is the director of OGIS.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Alina Simo, Director of the Office of Government Information Services here at the National Archives. I want to welcome everyone again to the multi-agency forum today, both here in our audience and those watching via live stream. Our focus today is on accessing immigration records through the Freedom of Information Act. I want to welcome and thank all of our agency panelists who have agreed to participate today. Please visit our OGIS website, where we have detailed biographies for all of our speakers today. And because we have a full agenda, I'm only going to introduce them very briefly in the order in which they will be speaking. Jill Eggleston, Associate Center Director, FOIA PA Branch, National Record Center, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Matt McNeil, Supervisory Attorney Advisor and Chief of the Advisory Opinions Division at Department of State. Sabrina Burrows, FOIA Director, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Ryan Stubbs, Associate Legal Advisor, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Mata Sabgoya, Program Analyst, Policy Division, Office of Refugee Resettlement, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Joe Schaaf, Supervisory Attorney Advisor for FOIA and Chief Counsel for Administrative Law, Executive Office for Immigration Review, Department of Justice. Last but not least, Patrick Connolly, our very own archivist from the National Archives at Philadelphia, and welcome to everyone today. We have reserved time at the end of today's session for questions from our audience. For our web audience, we are monitoring the chat on Livestream, and a member of the OGIS staff will share any questions that come in during the presentation. So we will save all of our questions till the end, and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jill to kick us off.
Thank you, Alina. And good morning to those of you watching here in McGowan Theater and those joining us via the web. So I am the Freedom of Information Act Officer for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Some of you may know that we are the largest FOIA office within the federal government. Last year alone, we received over 190,000 Freedom of Information Act requests, which, if you break that down on a daily basis, equates to 730 new requests each workday. 99% of the requests that USCIS received are filed by individuals looking for access to their own alien file, or A file. I have a staff of about 250 full-time government personnel, and then currently we have about 35 contractor personnel on site at the National Records Center that are helping us address a backlog. So I mentioned that the majority of our requests are for alien files. The A file is a record of transactions that an individual has with any of the immigration agencies as that individual passes through either the immigration or the inspection process. The A file is the official immigration record and has been since April 1st of 1944. So there are 3 agencies that share the A file: USCIS, ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. All 3 agencies contribute documents to the A file. And today, while we are in a hybrid world, the majority of our A files are physical paper files that sit and are housed at the National Records Center, which is where the FOIA office is located. We are moving. I mention a hybrid world because USCIS is currently moving towards an electronic A file. But for many years, we will be dealing with both a paper document and an electronic record. So what's in an A file? An A file contains forms, correspondence, and biometrics, typically that are filed with the agency by an applicant in order to support either an application or a petition for an immigration benefit. The A file also contains photographs, newspaper articles, and then there's additional law enforcement documents within the A file. They may deal with apprehension, seizure, or deportation. Alina asked us to tell you a little bit about our individual programs. And so I mentioned that we are co-located with the National Records Center, which is an underground facility in Lee Summit, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City. It's a place that we affectionately call the Cave because it is complete with a few bats now and time again. So our particular program is divided into 4 different branches. Our operations branch, which handles our day-to-day FOIA requests. We have a significant interest group, and they handle all of our non-A file requests. Those requesters are typically media requesters, and they're looking for access to USCIS policy documents. Occasionally, some USCIS government contracts and immigration statistics. We have an information disclosure branch, and they're responsible for our proactive disclosure. And we always encourage our FOIA requesters to go to our website first before filing a request to see if the information you are looking for has already been disclosed. Our information disclosure branch also posts our administrative appeals decisions, or our AAO decisions as they are called, and then they handle our congressional chairperson requests as well. And then last but not least, we have a quality assurance group who's responsible for our in-house training, and then they also handle all of our FOIA appeals. So looking at some of the numbers, over the past 5 years, the number of FOIA requests received by USCIS has increased by nearly 44%. We are expecting this year to get anywhere between 190 and 200,000 requests. And our current backlog is at about 48,000. Our average processing times for our A-file requests are posted on our website, and currently it's about a 6-month wait period if you're talking about a Track 2 request. So as some of you may know, the DHS regulation allows agencies or DHS components to work on a multi-track system. USCIS has 3 tracks. So if you are filing a request for a specific document out of an alien file, for instance, that's a Track 1 request, and they are processed more quickly. Our Track 2 request is by far the largest majority of requests that we receive, and those are individuals seeking access to the documents, the entire A file. And then our Track 3 request covers those individuals that have a court date settled before an immigration court, and they do receive some form of accelerated processing. The DHS regulation that we are bound by also provides, in certain circumstances, for expedited processing. And if a requester is interested in that, I would refer you to the DHS regulation for the specific requirements. So what do you need to do in order to file a FOIA request? Really, there are only 3 or 4 items that the regulation requires. First of all, your request has to be in writing. It has to reasonably describe the record that the individual is seeking. The requester has to indicate a willingness to pay any fees that may be associated with the request. And then last but not least, if you're looking for Privacy Act type records, and the alien file that I've been talking about falls within that category, then you have to provide verification of identity and consent if you are a third party asking to seek access to someone else's records. As you know, the FOIA statute gives the agencies 20 working days within which to respond to a FOIA request. I like to share with folks, I mentioned earlier that the 3 immigration components all share the same A file. USCIS is the custodian of that A file, so we are charged with housing it, maintaining it, tracking it, and transferring it. So what that looks like when you have 3 agencies sharing the same physical file is that if you file a FOIA request with my agency, 60% of the time the A file that you are looking for is co-located at the National Records Center. And we have a large contractor staff that do nothing but pull those alien files. 40% of the time, however, the A file that you are looking for is located out in the field. And that could be at a USCIS office, it could be at an ICE office, or it could be with CBP. So we physically track those files with a barcode, and when we locate the file in our National File Tracking System, which is now RAILS, we make a request that the records officer pull that file and it's physically shipped to the National Records Center. So every day, if you can imagine, we have large flatbed trucks full of pallets, full of boxes, full of A files. Those A files then are barcoded so that the tracking system is updated. The documents are pulled out of the A file and they are scanned into an electronic system, which we call FIPS. And so my staff of 250 then, when they are processing your FOIA request, are working off an electronic image of the A file. So the A file, once it is scanned then, is put back together and placed on a shelf until that A file is requested again, either by USCIS or the other 2 immigration components. We do process in a first-in, first-out basis. So we give date priority to requests as they come in. I mentioned the electronic system that we use. It's a workflow system, and it's a system-to-system processing system, I guess. It not only allows us to and generates correspondence with our requesters, but it also provides electronic redaction capability for our processors. I will mention, too, that we are in the process of developing and deploying a new system, which is called FIRST. We're excited about that. We expect that the system will be deployed by the end of this calendar year, and it's going to offer a lot of efficiencies that our current system does not have. It will provide an online portal for requesters so that you'll have the ability to go online and fill out an actual request form that mirrors our G639. That information will automatically populate into our case create system. And then at the end of the process, rather than delivering responsive records on a CD and mailing them out like we do today, you will have the ability to go into a private reading room and pull the documents directly. So, as I said, we're excited about the efficiencies that our new system are promised. The last thing that I will mention is our website. I did talk a little bit earlier about the fact that we do proactively disclose documents, and I encourage anyone to go there first before filing a request. We also have a lot of information on our website about actually the process, how you go about filing a FOIA. Our G639 form, although it is not a required form, is available on our website, and we encourage requesters to use that. If it's filled out completely and properly, it meets all the requirements of the DHS regulation. So that helps assure you that you've provided us with all the information that we need in order to identify the records that you're seeking and provide you with the responsive records. So I think I will stop there.
Excellent.
And turn it over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Jill, and thank you for including the State Department in this event, and thank you for joining us. So I work at the Department of State, which very famously does foreign policy for the United States, but we also do what's called consular affairs that makes determinations regarding application of immigration law for the purposes of visa applications, as well as nationality determinations for issuance of passport. The way FOIA works at the State Department, we have FOIA experts, we have immigration experts, we have a small team of FOIA experts who are embedded within the visa office where I work, and I'm really on the immigration side. I know the immigration law, but I am one of the bridge builders with our FOIA team as we go through your FOIA requests to respond to them in the most appropriate way. In order to put this in context, I'd like to give just a brief description of the visa process, which takes place at our visa issuing posts. Those are embassies or consulates overseas. There are over 200 of them. There are really two types of visa applications. Those for temporary visitors to the United States, they're called non-immigrant visas, or immigrant visas for those who are going to relocate here permanently. The reason I raise that is that for an immigrant visa, everyone has to have a petition, which goes through USCIS first. So USCIS takes a look at those cases first, determines that there's a qualifying relationship that the person's entitled to immigrate to the United States. Those cases then come to us abroad where the individual can apply for their visa. The NIV side, the non-immigrant visa side, some categories follow that same path where you go to USCIS first and then it comes to us. Others allow applicants to come in off the street and just say they'd like to come to the US and ask for a visa. The reason I raise that is because, well, one, the consular officer's standard of review is a little different for each, so the standard overall is to the satisfaction of the consular officer. But in the cases where there's a petition, the consular officer's hands are a little bit more tied in terms of their overall qualifications. But after, on either side, once the alien applies for a visa, our job is to either issue or refuse. We have to adjudicate the visa. The reason I go into that background is because this will get into the types of responses you get when you request FOIA for, because it'll vary a little bit depending if the person you're representing or working with was applied for an immigrant visa or non-immigrant visa. So after someone makes a visa application, you might be interested in seeing what happened during that interaction. So the way to make a FOIA request to the Department of State, we have a different form than USCIS. We frequently get USCIS's or DHS forms in support of FOIA applications, and we do not accept them. So don't send DHS forms to the Department of State. We have a form, it's called a DS 4240, and that is our official FOIA application form. You can also mail us a letter that's notarized and includes a statement that you're requesting the records under penalty of perjury, that everything that you've asked for, how you've identified yourself is true and correct. If we have such a letter, we will process that as a valid FOIA request. I think the normal rules apply in terms of tell us what you're looking for so we know what to look for. But with individual applicants, it's very, we ask for identifying information that allows us to know who the individual is, date of birth, place of birth help. If there are case numbers, that is so much easier for us to cut to the chase and find the person that you're interested in. Now, the way we keep records at the State Department really changed probably first in 1997, where we introduced an electronic database that houses records of all visa applications that get made. In probably the next decade or so, we continued to take a lot of paper applications, but all of those were recorded, all those applications were reflected in our electronic database. Probably the last 5 to 8 years, we have gone completely electronic, so the documents, at least the application itself that's submitted, is electronically captured and recorded in our system. And for that reason, when you write in to request records, most of the searching for individual visa applicants happens in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters. A lot of times the requesters will specifically ask that the post involved, the embassy or consulate that issued the visa, that they do a search. For the most part, we don't anticipate that they will have any records. So in 99% of the cases, they will take whatever is given. If it's relevant to the case, they'll scan it into that electronic record. Most cases, they will give the documents back to the applicant. So we keep very little in terms of what was provided in way of support unless it's strictly necessary. So when you do make that request, what we can provide you is fairly limited because there's a provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act that makes visa records of the Department of State. So those records that are relevant to the adjudication of a visa, that is our decision to issue or refuse, they're confidential under law. A lot of that probably is due to the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, that there's some desire to keep private the records that foreign nationals give us from other governments. And it's just sort of a bedrock principle, but that also extends to people who are seeking their own immigration records. They're considered confidential. So we can't give you the results of the determination. You won't see the consular officer's notes. What we can give you, and that because they're protected under Section 222F of the INA, that means they fall under FOIA exemption number 3. For information that is prohibited from disclosure by another federal law. So what we do give people is what you gave us. So that's fairly limited. If you gave us an application and you just want to know what you said on that application, trying to establish some fact that's important to the requester, we will give that back to you. Same with birth certificates, marriage certificates, things like that that are natural to come up in a visa application. It gets a little tricky when we get into those petition-based cases. So all immigrant visa cases are petition-based because there we have a U.S. person who serves as the petitioner, and we have the alien who is the beneficiary of the petition and the visa applicant. In those cases, if you're looking for both records, then we'll need releases from both individuals. If you provide just a release from the petitioner, we'll give you what the petitioner gave us. If you give us just the alien applicant, we'll give you what they provided us. So that is really the gist. I know it can be frustrating sometimes that you're hoping to get a more fulsome record and that you get a very limited one back. We will also see individuals who just want some proof that they were in fact issued a visa. So they may have had a passport that they lost or was stolen long ago, but it had a visa in it, and for some reason they need to prove that they had it. If you send a request just requesting for some confirmation that it was received, we do generally provide a letter providing that confirmation that a visa was issued on such and such date, and we'll give specific identifying details that we hope will be helpful to people. Frequently, people will, years later, know that they've been refused a visa, but not recall why or have the specific refusal notice that was given at the time. We don't generally save the refusal notices. We record the refusal in the system and give a refusal notice to the individual. That is usually a form letter that ticks a box to explain the justification, and the consular officer gives an oral justification, an oral explanation at the time of refusal. So if you're interested in knowing why you're refused, the best place to go for that is to just reach out to the post that was involved. That doesn't have to happen through a FOIA request necessarily. In fact, actually all of our consulates and embassies overseas have a public facing point of contact, so you could reach out to them. It's different for depending on whether the applicant applied for a non-immigrant visa or an immigrant visa, so you'd want to make that distinction when you're seeking those records. I think I'll close up by just talking about policy-related requests that people make, that there are a lot of decisions and determinations in regard to how we administer immigration law that are of great interest to the public. We have seen an uptick in FOIA requests as immigration has become a much more pressing issue in our public dialogue. We do respond to those policy-based requests. I am involved with them somewhat, so I don't know how they're tasked or where they go to, but I help our FOIA team find the offices that will be involved, go over the request to make sure that we've made all relevant exemptions. So basically that's just a plug for saying, yes, we do accept policy-related requests. We do provide responsive documents that they do take longer than these individual requests because it just takes a long time to sort of gather them up. But we do work on them continuously and try to be as responsive as we can to our responsibilities under FOIA. And I think those are all the points I had to make. So I will pass it to the next presenter.
Good morning. My name is Sabrina Burrows. I'm the FOIA Director with Customs and Border Protection. Just as Jill said, we're under DHS. She has the first largest amount of FOIA requests received. We have the second largest. In fiscal year 2016, we received 66,900 requests. In fiscal year 17, we received 88,840, and year to date, we at 86,000 now. So we're pretty sure that we're going to go over the 90,000 FOIA requests for this fiscal year. On average, we receive 350 to 400 requests a day, and currently our backlog is at 10,639 requests. And our backlog has spiked a lot in the increase of the FOIA requests as well as the executive order and border wall requests that we have received. What records do CBP have? CBP has records pertaining to detention, expedited removal, people who are non-citizens who are apprehended while trying to get into the U.S. illegally. CBP field operations, they have the records of the arrivals and departures from the U.S. by air, land, or sea dating back to 1982. Such records are useful for people who have lost their passports or copies of their I-94s, which documents a traveler's arrival and departures. Requesters should know that CBP does not have records on the entry and exit of persons arriving or departing the U.S. before 1982. So the most commonly requested CBP records are the I-94 entry-exit records. I believe they want to document their legal proof of entry so they can get a benefit with USCIS. Also, the records of inspection and examination of a U.S. port of entry. They frequently ask for that for secondary and inspection records, usually issued by our Office of Field Operation. We get import of trade requests, CBP background investigations, apprehensions, expedited removal by Border Patrol between official ports of entry and our CBP Trusted Traveler program. The way that our office, the CBP FOIA office works, we receive 80%, 85% of traveler requests, and that's the entry exit records. The other 20% is for non-traveler requests. So our main focus is trying to get out those entry exit records because that's the highest amount of FOIA requests we receive. However, we do have a team that deals with the non-traveler requests, and that's 20%. We do the first in, first out in our office, and then also, too, we have an influx of litigation. So we had to make a third team of just the litigation team. So some of our GIS employees, in which we have 25 processors in our office and 6 FOIA assistants. So we had to hire contractors. We had 13 on board just to deal with the litigation alone. And then, too, we have an agreement with USCIS if anyone was to request any information on the A file, and they have CBP documents within the A file, they will process those documents on our behalf. So how to submit your FOIA request? We actually prefer to submit it electronically through FOIA Online, which would be the quickest way to process your records. If you submit it yourself electronically, that would free up time for the GIS to process more FOIA requests. You send it through the mail, which you can, or via fax. You know, they will have to upload the records, track the records in the system, and then in the mail, it may take a week and a half to get to us, and then it has to go through the whole process. When submitting your request, we ask that you sent the verification of consent form, or if you're an attorney or third-party person, to just send the form G28 or G639. Please note, if you ask for information on an A file, we will refer those to USCIS because they're the custodians of the A file. But if you're asking for specific CBP records, we ask you to be specific as possible so we can get you the documents that you are requesting. Well, that's about it. A brief overview of CBP and what records we have. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So my name is Ryan Stubbs. I'm an associate legal advisor with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Katrina Pavlik-Keenan is the ICE FOIA officer. She was not able to attend today and asked that I attend on her behalf, which I am happy to do. My division, the Government Information Law Division of the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor at ICE, handles information disclosure issues, both within and external to the agency. We also adjudicate all the FOIA appeals that come into ICE and handle all the FOIA litigations. I've been with ICE for 4 years. Before that, I was at the Department of Defense, Office of General Counsel, where I also worked on FOIA litigations and some high-profile FOIA requests. But I'd like to take a second to step back, if I can, if you guys will allow me, and just tell you, personally, I believe very strongly in the FOIA. I'm very passionate about the FOIA. I believe in the transparency and the access to records that the FOIA allows, and that is how I go about, conducting my business every day when I'm handling FOIA appeals or FOIA litigations. Once I came across this map that I found online that showed all the countries around the world who had strong FOIA laws and those that didn't. Generally the ones that didn't have the strong FOIA laws had a lot of corruption, and here in the United States, I believe it's one of our most important laws. So I'll step off my soapbox now. I believe very strongly in it. I'm very passionate about it. So before I start speaking, I want that to be the backdrop on what I'm about to say. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to apply redactions that are appropriate on ICE records. So if there's B5 attorney work product or there's law enforcement sensitive information, I'm going to, of course, protect that with B7E. But it doesn't mean that anytime a FOIA request or appeal or litigation comes across my desk, I'll make sure that anyone who's likely to have records is tasked to do that search and to provide the records. With that said, when we get appeals in my office, we review them de novo, which means from scratch. So if a search is challenged or the withholdings are challenged, we look at it from scratch. Same goes for litigation. Most of our litigations right now are due to not responding within the 20 days required by the FOIA. And I'll get into some of our statistics as well. We also have these massive backlogs and increased numbers of FOIA requests. Which this would be a good time to bring up the stats. So at this time last year, ICE had received 48,000 FOIA requests, and right now we're at 82,000 FOIA requests. So it's almost doubled, again, partially due to the change in the climate. There's a lot of interest. Currently, the backlog is also about 10,000. Last year at this time, we had 52 FOIA litigations. In my office, which consists of 15 attorneys, we have 80 litigations. So that's up dramatically as well. The FOIA staff is also down, so funding is always an issue in the FOIA. So they had approximately 50 processors last year, and right now the ICE FOIA office has 33 processors. So I was trying to do the math while I was sitting here, and I can't do it because I'm a lawyer. But if you divide the 82,000 requests by 33 people, it's some incredible number that each person has to process over a fiscal year. So 10,000 backlog, I think, it's pretty good considering. So what records does ICE have? So ICE records include immigration enforcement records, which document ICE enforcement actions such as issuing detainers, arrest records, charging documents, detention documents, and removal of aliens for administrative immigration violations. This information becomes part of the A file. So as you've seen the overlap here, USCIS is the custodian. There are times where an ICE field office, whether it's an ERO field office or an OCC, an OPLA field office, may have that A file because someone is in proceedings. But if they're not in proceedings or they don't have a hearing coming up for a long time, the A file will reside with USCIS. The main difference between immigration records in our databases and the A file, I would say, is that our records are living records, so they change on a daily basis. The A file is it's a point in time. So if you request an A file, 5 years ago versus today, you're going to get a different response because it's at that point in time. And so if other actions have happened, whether it's arrests or detentions or whatever, there'll be additional documents in the A file. ICE also has records related to statistics. We get a lot of FOIA requests for immigration statistics. If a detainee passes away, we get FOIA requests related to the death of the detainee. We get a lot of requests for contracts, detention facility contracts, bed space information. We get FOIA requests for vacancy announcements for various, ICE positions. An example of a document that is an ICE document in the A file is an I-213, which is the record of deportable alien. You could have many of those over time in theory, but if you request the A file, you would get that document in theory from the A file. And the way it works is CIS processes it and processes CBP records, and ICE records are sent to ICE. We process and release them directly to the requester. So the three pieces are all processed on that initial A file request. If there's an appeal, we will adjudicate the withholdings on the documents that we released to the requester, but the search, we don't adjudicate the search. That goes to USCIS to adjudicate, since they searched by providing the A file. Medical records are not in the A file. ICE policies in general are not in the A file, so we get a lot of FOIA requests for those directly. So you'd come to ICE directly, or the facility for the medical records. I'll speak about that more in a moment. ICE also has criminal investigatory records, which pertain to ICE investigations into suspected violations of laws regulating the movement of people and goods in and out of the United States. So this is mostly HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. The records that they have include worksite enforcement. If you see a worksite enforcement operation, that would be records that they have. They also deal with counterfeit goods relating to intellectual property. They also have the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, which manages schools with non-immigrant students, as well as F visas for non-immigrant academic students, M visas for vocational students, and J visas for exchange visitors. Back to the medical records. So we maintain medical records for individuals who receive medical treatment while in ICE custody at an ICE Health Service Corps staffed facility, IHSC. ICE.gov has a great link on it with a map of all the facilities that we have around the country. It has contacts on each of the sites and how to request records from each of those facilities. Medical records, someone in detention can request. They have the right to request their medical records, and they do that directly while in the facility. I believe it has to be a request in writing. We also give them a copy of their medical records. If they are deported or they leave detention, they get a full copy of their medical record. What can I expect when I submit a FOIA request to ICE? We accept the G639. We also require the G28 if it's for an attorney. A tip, if you mention in your request how you or your client came into contact with ICE, that'll help us find your records. So for example, we get a lot of requests that say, this person was arrested at or near this location on the border in 2005. We'll do a search for records, and if it comes back with no records, we'll recommend probably in the response that you maybe reach out to CBP. A lot of times an action at the border, an arrest at the border, if ICE doesn't find records, CBP might have records. So we'll recommend that you file a FOIA request with CBP. Lastly, we do not provide responses with respect to anyone who's a fugitive. To the extent that the records or the information sought could assist the fugitive in continuing to evade the law. If the records would not, it's a legal analysis, it's a fact-based analysis, and it's case by case. If the records would not help someone maintain a fugitive status, for example, maybe their medical records, then we would release them. However, if they want their investigatory file on where, what's going on right now with actions to their case, then that's an example of something we wouldn't release because they're a fugitive. That's all I have for ICE.
Hi. Hello, my name is Mata, and I work for the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is an office within HHS. I want to make it clear from the onset that I do not process FOIA requests. I do coordinate the responses. We have a different office at ACF that handles FOIA requests. We do things slightly different. They used to process the request for case files, for our UAC case files, but that was moved to our office, ORR, only because they had no resources, and we are the custodians of those case files. So our mandate at ORR is to look after the kids who are apprehended at the border. The length of stay at our shelters is on average 57 days. And while they are in our care, you can imagine the programs generate a lot of information, and those make up the case files of the kids. The only immigration records that we have in the case files are the NTA, the notice to appear, and some of the forms that also USCIS issues. Those we release. We also release medical files. We release the intake placement information, case management notes. We have a process on how to request the case files, and that's on our website, on ORR's website. There's an authorization of release form. When it's a third party asking for the case file, they obviously have to provide personal identifiable information and ID. Most of our requests come from the parents, sponsors, or the attorneys representing them in immigration court. The majority of the requests that we receive are from the LSPs. These are attorneys that ORR funds. Those are our grantees. We receive, on average, 400 case file requests. And we are a team of 4 people. We try to process this request within 10 working days for urgent requests. An urgent request is when a child is almost aging out because they might not receive the same benefits, and also when there's an upcoming court hearing date. Again, I just wanted to go back to the other FOIAs. So while I also coordinate the responses, I work closely with the FOIA office, the ACF FOIA office. They receive requests for monitoring reports of some of our shelters. They also receive policy documents. They receive cooperative agreements as well, and grants information about our shelters. They are heavily backlogged as the interest has also gone up on our program. They also have current litigations, which OGC within HHS helps with, and also our office. We have 3 lawyers at ORR helping on the litigations. But again, my main focus is on the case files. The request for case files, how long it takes, and we really try to make sure that the files, the attorneys receive the files on time. We try not to miss any court hearing, and right now we don't have a backlog at the moment. That's it.
Morning, everybody. My name's Joe Schaff. I am the FOIA supervisory attorney for the EOIR, Executive Office of Immigration Review, within the Department of Justice, not within the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, at least for now. We handle about about 60,000 FOIA requests this year. This is up from, I've been here 2 years now. In 2016, I think we had about 36,000 in 2016, 44,000 in 2017, 50,000 for fiscal year 2018, and we'll be on track for much more than that for the next fiscal year. We'll probably get 60,000 this calendar year, which is still less than what some of the DHS folks have, but it is a huge increase for us. And we're kind of trying to manage the inflow in various ways. Our staff right now consists of 2 attorneys, 6 information specialists, and about a dozen contractors. So we have some room to grow in the staffing area, but our folks do a really good job, especially of getting the records of the proceedings requests out. We usually get those out in around 30 business days, more or less. Complex requests, which we also get, take quite a bit longer. 99% of our requests, as for some of the DHS components, are for the records of proceedings, which are alien files, basically. So it's usually a first-party request from an alien or from their attorney, and they need that file for their court date or to prepare their court documents. So again, we take those very seriously. We really want to get those out as soon as possible, and we're pretty good about getting those out within about 30 business days. Not always, but usually. Like the other components, we are still working with paper records. These are paper files. Most of what is in the record of proceedings are materials from the A files that the DHS attorneys have presented or DHS has given to us, and they're placed in the file. Also other things that the response attorney may have placed in the file and some other things. But most of what is in our records of proceedings are copies of things that DHS already has. But we do process, we do not refer those DHS documents back to DHS through agreements that we have with DHS. We go ahead and process the request for the record. Now, if you're looking for that record of proceedings as a first-party requester, which again is 98, 99% of the requests that we get, the 3 forms that you need to keep in mind are going to be the DOJ 361, okay, which is a certification of identity. You can get that online at our website or Google, DOJ 361. That is our verification that you are who you say you are. It also gives you an opportunity to put someone else's name on that form as a third-party receiver, okay? We do accept other verifications of identity. They're laid out on our website, but the DOJ 361 is really what we're looking for. The other 2 forms, if you're an attorney, are the E28, which is an appearance form in our immigration courts, and the E27, which is a form of appearance before the Board of Immigration Appeals. A word of caution with that, just sending the E28 itself will not grant you first-party access. We also have to verify that that E28 was presented to the court and loaded into the system. We have to verify that you are, in fact, an attorney of record. The E28 by itself doesn't prove that, because you can fill out an E28. It's not actually signed by your client. It doesn't mean that you necessarily presented it to the court and became an attorney of record. So that does cause some confusion with the attorney's offices out there. We have to correct that often. So please keep that in mind. If you're going to send us an E28, that's great, but you also have to make sure that you've presented it so that you're an attorney of record. If you are not ready to present that E28, if you're not sure you're going to pick up this client, have your client sign a DOJ 361, and then we'll be able to give you the materials. We also have a sharp increase in the number of complex requests that we're receiving, as the DHS components are, requests for policy and statistics. I would say it's about a 400% increase in the 2 years that I've been with the EOIR, which is a lot, considering we only have 2 attorneys, including me, and I also do the administrative law, the ethics, the standards of conduct, things like that. So we really have about 1.5 attorneys. So we're doing our best to deal with that right now and thinking about management strategies for that inflow. Those requests are taking more like 60, 90, 120 days. If it's a very complex request, maybe even 180 days. We're really trying to keep them to something less than 180 days. And a lot of them do go out in about 60 to 90, especially if you are willing to narrow your request to something that we can get a hold of more quickly process more quickly. And most of the requesters are pretty good about that. When we get a complex request, usually the first thing we're going to do is contact the requester and say, this is going to take a long time. Can you work with us to help get this to something where we can give you something useful in a much faster time period? And that's a win-win for everybody when that works out. We, as I said, are still working with the paper system, but like DHS, we're going to electronic format. This is throughout EOIR. We are now instituting, as of last month, the very beginnings of the EROP, or Electronic Records of Proceedings system, or eWorld. Actually, it's even bigger than that. It's going to be all court records are going to be electronics-based. We started in San Diego last month as a pilot project, not mandatory yet, but if you're an attorney in San Diego or an alien and you want your, well, just attorneys for now, and you want that ROP, you're actually going to be entering electronically through the eWorld system, and then you'll be able to get the ROP eventually, when everything's online, you'll get that electronically. So attorneys won't even have to file a FOIA request per se. They'll be able to have access to those documents through the eWorld system. That'll be great for everybody. The FOIA world is still managing things kind of the old-fashioned way with PDF documents. We are trying to go to a commercial off-the-shelf program, similar probably to what Jill was talking about. We have a contract with a vendor. However, that contract has not been fully approved yet, so I can't say exactly which program it's going to be, but it will be a commercial off-the-shelf program when everything is all said and done, where you will enter your FOIA request on a portal after registering. You will be able to track your FOIA request online in more or less real time. We on our end will be able to process the FOIA electronically to the greatest extent possible. And when we've got the eWorld system online and all the ROPs are finally electronic, we really will be working fully electronic, and I think we'll have a much, much more satisfactory processing rate, even for those complex requests, when we have that tool available to us. For now, we just do the best we can with the technology and the staffing that we have, and I just ask that you please be patient, and please work with us on making sure that we have a request that we can work on in a way that will give you something useful, something that you need, something that you want, without it having to take an extraordinary amount of time. Thank you.
So, Patrick, before I get to you, I missed this, Joe, but I wanted to ask if you could just address very briefly what EOIR does.
Yeah, we oversee the nation's immigration courts. There were 58 when I came on board. I think we've got a couple since then, and there may be more courts coming in the future. Each of those courts handles alien cases where there are various. We don't do anything with the inflow of the aliens. We don't do anything with the intake. However, if there is a claim that the alien has that they should stay in the country when they might otherwise be deportable, they can go through the courts and they can get a stay of deportation. So we have seen quite a bit more of those cases in the last few years than previously. Therefore, there's a bit of a backlog in the cases, and I think that is driving, in many ways, the backlog of FOIA requests that we have. As the number of cases upticks, of course, the number of FOIA requests uptick as well.
You're up.
I'm just going to take
can-
this right
you
off. That's fine.
Have 45 minutes.
Right on. Because I'm going to need it. Good morning, everybody. Patrick Conley with the National Archives at Philadelphia. I do not work in this building. We do have National Archives locations throughout the country. I hope everyone knew that already, but if you didn't, that's my cheap plug for the rest of us. Come out and join us. Unlike my colleagues up here who have been talking about records that are active, these are records that are still in use by the agency. The records I want to talk about have been accessioned by the National Archives and Records Administration. What do I mean by that? We have taken legal custody. These records now belong to the National Archives. They've ended their active life, and I don't want to say their useful life because they're still especially useful records, but they're no longer needed by the agency. And if they're deemed permanent, they come to us at the National Archives, whether it be this building, out at College Park, or any of our regional facilities throughout the country. And again, let me just have a cheap plug for the regional facilities, just so you understand what I'm talking about. Records that we have here at Archives 1, College Park, are headquarters records. These are federal agencies and the headquarters records. Out in the region, we will have the field office records of an agency. So, for example, in Philadelphia, we have records from federal agencies in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and West Virginia. We don't have things within the Beltway. Goddard's not within the Beltway, right? It's just a block away, right? So we have darn close, but not quite. And that's the case for all the regional facilities. And also, unlike my colleagues up here who have been talking about having a central FOIA office, we do have that at the National Archives. But we also process and receive FOIA requests throughout the agency. Oftentimes, a FOIA request will come into the office who actually does hold the records. Later on, I'll tell you how you can find out, well, who owns what. So how do we do a FOIA, and what do we think about FOIA in the National Archives? Well, I'm filtering it, because I'm not a specific FOIA staff. I'm an archivist. I work on records. I answer customer inquiries. It came down to two words: access and protection. Access to records, access to our democracy, and on the other hand, protection. What do we want to protect? Well, for the most part, when we're talking about immigration records, and that's what I want to focus on right now, personal information, maybe that third-party information, privacy for individuals, okay? With all that said, now I'm going to turn right around and say, I'm the anti-FOIA person up here. What? Well, I'm not against FOIA, not at all. But many of the records the National Archives holds, because of their accession, oftentimes are already open to the public. A great majority of our records are open. Some of the records I want to talk about are, in fact, open records. And they're some of our most useful and widely used records regarding immigration and citizenship. I want to make sure that we talk about citizenship here as well. We get a lot of requests in my office, and I do talk to other folks throughout the field that also get requests that are coming as a FOIA request. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not necessary in a lot of cases. A lot of these records are, in fact, open, even though they are from executive office agencies. For example, we do have passenger lists of individuals going back to 1820. All right, 1820. They go through 1897 when they are with the U.S. Customs Service. After that, they become part of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. There was a point in time where Customs was the quote-unquote immigration authority in this country. It was passed on to INS later on, and of course to USCIS today. Passenger lists are exactly what we're talking about. Lists of individuals entering the United States. At one point in time, immigration was very free, very open. Essentially, you had to have a heartbeat to walk into the country. And if you didn't have a heartbeat, it was noted on the passenger list. That was one of the things that we wanted to make sure. We wanted to know the number of people coming into the country. We weren't so concerned with the who. Okay, and when you take a look at our records, you'll see that John Smith, 40 years old, male, England. That's about the size of it. As time goes on, laws change. You'll see changes in these lists whereby we're asking about your health. You're asking about are you capable of supporting yourself? Are you an anarchist? But what anarchist is going to say yes? That's my question. Are you a polygamist? Things of that nature. Trying to weed out individuals that we do not want entering the country. Jill already talked about A files, or actually, let me talk another second about passenger lists. I don't want to get out of order with the types of records I'm talking about. Passenger lists do continue throughout the 20th century, and even we talked about 1982 being a date that passenger passenger arrivals are available. Well, what happens before that? Well, National Archives has those records up to that point. Now, do we have them for every single port up to 1982 exactly? Not necessarily. There are many ports of entry into this country. Ellis Island wasn't the only one. Later on, airports, St. Louis became a port of entry at one point in time because of airline traffic. So there are numerous ports of entry. How do you know, well, what we might have on a particular port? Well, you could go to our website. I'm going to say that quite a bit. Our website does enumerate what ports of arrivals we have and what are the dates for those records. And usually they run from the 19th century up through roughly 1982 for many, many of these American ports. In addition, we have A-files, and these only came to us a handful of years ago, and these are records that, Jill already explained what they are. We're talking about the same exact records, and they moved from her facility on one side of the mountain, well, is it a mountain or a hill out there? Yeah, it's a cave. One side of the cave to the other side of the cave, at the National Archives at Kansas City. These are records for individuals that are born before 1909. So we are talking about much older records than the ones that might be available via USCIS. And they are, just as Jill had said, they begin in roughly 1944, although the records of the National Archives do have earlier records, oftentimes back between 1940 and 1944, when an alien may have registered. There may be a record of that as well, or even much earlier records having to do with their life in the old country, dating back to possibly their birth. These records, unlike passenger lists that they are for the most part, free and open. A-files do have some issues, and we deal with privacy issues in the A-files. So when you request an A-file, you may or may not get the full file, depending on what is involved, what is actually in the file. More often than not, if anything needs to be redacted or withheld, it's going to be withheld for that B6 exemption for personal privacy reasons. Okay. Naturalization records, a person comes to this country, they live their life, the A-file documents their interaction with the federal government, oftentimes, when I'm speaking about the records, the INS for the most part. But there comes a point in time that individual is going to become a United States citizen. National Archives offices throughout the country have these records, but interestingly enough, whereas if you were to go to USCIS for the records, you absolutely positively need to submit a FOIA request. Not the case with our records, because they are held, or they were created by the United States District Courts. And this is a very important thing to understand about the FOIA. FOIA applies to the executive branch of the government. It does not apply to the judiciary. Okay? These naturalization records that we have, dating back, in many instances, to 1790, come from the United States courts and are not covered by FOIA. Which begs the question, well, do I get everything in the file? Absolutely, positively. These are records that were filed in open court, and records filed in open court are freely available unless otherwise sealed by a judge. That would be the only time, but I can't say I have ever seen a naturalization record sealed by a judge, even in the most wild circumstances. They are pretty much wide open. So it's a really important thing to remember, even if we weren't talking about immigration records in relationship to naturalization, perhaps maybe a naturalization proceeding in a district court, a denaturalization in the United States District Court. That would be an open record that you could request from the National Archives, no questions asked. Of course, give us enough information about those particular records. In addition to these other records, we do have records of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. These come from Record Group 85. Most of our offices, to a varying degree, will have these records. And this is where you get into just a wide variety of things. In my particular office, we have records dating back to the 1880s, and the Pennsylvania Board of Public Charities, who took care of many immigration matters in the state of Pennsylvania at that point in time, in conjunction with the U.S. Customs Bureau. Many offices have records involving Chinese Exclusion Act case files These are records, again, for the most part, starting 1882, and have records within the files going up to the 1960s. And again, those records may be covered by FOIA in that there are some privacy exemptions that we may withhold information. Okay. Other records may include office files. There's a large series of immigrant subject files from the INS in this particular building. The records are indexed online even, so it becomes very easy to find what you're looking for and go ahead and access them up in the research room here at Archives 1. How do you access these things? I already said, much of what I said is, it's open, it's out there. Well, it is, and we do our darndest at the National Archives to make access happen. That's what we do. We want to make sure that these records are available. How do we do it in the case of, say, our passenger arrival lists? Well, many of them that are older than 50 years old are freely available on Ancestry.com. They are a partner of ours that digitizes our records, posts them online. After a number of years, they become live in our catalog. Then become freely available to the public. Naturalization records, how do you get copies of these? Well, you could come join us at our facilities, or simply email. Simply pick up the phone. We will take these requests. What if you need to make a FOIA request? You are searching our catalog. You come across records, especially once you get into the INS records, these RG 85 records, into the 1970s, the 80s, the 90s, which we do in fact have. Many are electronic records. How do you access those? Well, that's the point in time where you take a look at our catalog. Are they covered by FOIA? It will let you know that. And then you can make your request. How do you make your request? Well, just like Jill said, you want to make sure we know what you're asking for. You be as specific as possible for us. Something that's too broad, we're just not going to be able to find. It becomes too difficult. Do your best to give us the dates. To say, I'm looking for an incident that happened in the 1960s. Well, the 1960s were a pretty long decade. So we need you to do a little bit better than that. Recently received a request that was wonderful. It said, I'm looking for an incident in this body of water on this date. Well, that sounds great. It was perfect. But unfortunately, over 24 vessels replied to the incident. So in that case, we need to write back to the person and say, well, look, that's great. We see some evidence here, but I need you to be just a little bit more specific by letting us know, well, who was arriving at that scene? What more can you tell me? All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to everyone. Jill and I asked all the panelists to take about 15 minutes each, and our timekeeper did not have to hold up any time sign to say you were running out of time. So thank you very much to everyone for sticking to all of that. I am going to turn over to audience questions and live stream questions in a minute. We did reach out to some of our constituent groups and received some questions in advance. And if you don't mind, Jill, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. I think there were a couple of questions that were addressed to USCIS that perhaps, if you feel comfortable answering, would be great. So the first set of questions relate to refugee resettlement through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. And they wanted to know does USCIS have guidance or training materials for staff who are responding to FOIA requests for refugee files? And what is USCIS doing to ensure that its FOIA responses include these records?
Sure. I'll be happy to answer that as best I can. So this is a little bit of a hybrid situation, and that's why we included all these various panel members. So my colleague sitting to the right with Department of State, Matt mentioned that when we're talking about refugees, that both USCIS and State Department have a role. And it really depends at what point of the stage that particular refugee application is in. That determines who's going to have the records. And I can give you a little bit of an example. So if a refugee overseas files an application, is interviewed overseas, and that application is denied, and that is with the Department of State, that individual has the ability to file an appeal. Once there's been a final determination made with respect to that particular refugee, the State Department has 6 months to turn whatever documentation they may have over to USCIS. The A file is not created until those records are turned over to USCIS. So if you're seeking documents within that, let's say, 6-month window, you may find that if you file a FOIA request with USCIS, we will tell you that we don't have a record. And that is an accurate statement because the record has not been turned over to us yet for creation. So basically what we recommend at that point is either for the individual to file a FOIA request with State Department to see if they can access the records there, or to wait 6 months and file a request with USCIS again, because by then perhaps the A file has been created. We do work closely with our RAO counterparts within USCIS. We reach out to them whenever we get these types of requests. They sometimes have information in some of the electronic systems that indicate that, yes, there was an interview that took place, and yes, there are documents that are resident with State Department. That's probably the best way that I can answer that question. Matt, do you have any?
Do you wanna add anything?
Yeah, do you want to add anything?
I don't have a ton to add, other than, and part of that is because of the nature of states' bureaucracy, and that refugee issues are generally handled by a bureau called Population, Migration, and Refugees. I make sure I got that right. My office is consular affairs, working with immigrant and non-immigrant visas. So we do have a very small role in processing some what are called follow to join refugee and asylee applications for around the world in places where USCIS does not have a presence. So we fulfill that function on behalf of USCIS. But even though our consular officers do that, the FOIA requests still come in and will be processed by the PRM Bureau.
Oh, sure, sorry.
No, it's okay. The other group of questions we got, Joe, relates to immigration record requests to USCIS other than A files for individuals in removal proceedings, such as refugee requesting their records after their resettlement application is rejected. The questions we received are, what are the average processing times? Who handles these applications? Who is reviewing the records prior to release? And are records, requests, and searches handled manually? And what portions can be done electronically? Sorry, that was a 3-part compound question.
Okay.
I will leave them here so you can remember them.
Thank you. So the average processing times with respect to these refugee files are no different than processing times for our A files, and that would more than likely be a Track 2 request. And I think I talked a little bit earlier about our average processing times right now are about 6 months for a Track 2 complete A file. My staff of 250 handles these FOIA requests as they do other A file requests. That once we get the A file in, as I said, we scan it electronically. They review line for line, document for document, the information that's contained within the A file to make a determination based on the statute what information can be released and what information has to be withheld. And then lastly, our record request handled manually and what portions can be done electronically. So we do, I guess I talked a little bit about the fact that we have a G639 form that we currently accept. Usually most of our requests come in by mail, although we do have a FOIA mailbox, so you can submit the request electronically to our USCIS FOIA mailbox. We also accept fax, if anybody has a fax machine anymore. Once our first system comes online, and I talked a little bit about that, will be at the end of this calendar year, then these individuals, as well as other requesters, will be able to fill out a request online and submit it that way. So it will cut down on mail times both in terms of receipt and then at the end of the process in deliverance. So hopefully I answered that.
Great, thank you. I promise not to put too many other people on the spot. I think those were really the bulk of the questions. I also just want to let everyone know we are going to put together after this forum a set of questions, either frequently asked questions and/or questions and answers we've received. We'll post those on the OGIS website. And last but not least, I want to give a plug to our first FOIA Ombuds Observer. I'm very excited to be able to announce that we posted yesterday our very first issue, and it's all about immigration records. And I want to thank everyone on the panel who helped us with that to make sure that it's accurate and gives good information to everyone and covers some of the material that was covered today in terms of how you file a FOIA request with each of these agencies. Anyone else on the panel want to add anything before we turn over for questions? Any other great thoughts that occurred to you after you finished speaking? I always want to give folks that opportunity. Nope, going once, going twice, okay. So we have reserved time. We certainly have a lot more time than we had thought. We can go until noon. I want to invite anyone in the audience to come up to our mics if you want to ask a question. And for our web audience, we are monitoring the chat on Livestream. And I believe Sheila Portanovo, our attorney advisor on our OGIS staff, will share any questions that have come in on live chat. Let me go ahead and start turning it over to questions. We already have folks queued up.
Thank you. Thanks for the panel. And to me, the question of immigration record seems from the birth to whatever, maybe before the death or after death. I just wonder if you have those records and if you transfer among agencies, especially, and then from the hard copy to the electronic, would you be able to tell the difference whether the record you have maintained its accuracy, whether it's different by ethnic group, and whether ethnic group, their data will be changed more easily so they can be victimized? And how do you deal with the victim, let's say immigrant, if their property are taken away by abandonment of property, that implies a death. So how do you handle the record of that immigrants? And so I just wonder if the redaction especially used, and whether by attorney or whether by layman to request, is there any difference about their use or reductions? So they don't have to be responsible about the accuracy of the data. So would you be able to tell more about how do the data imply, not just an amount or percentage of response, and actually by the response rate, whether anything different by ethnic group? Actually, some people request and never get response, and they get a replacement card of the citizenship card, but never get response. Would you be able to tell anything that you know in more detail about accuracy and the difference among ethnic group?
Okay, thanks very much for the question. Anyone want to take a stab at answering that?
So I will start by saying, and I think that you were asking for differences between various ethnic groups with respect to FOIA requests, for instance, and information that's redacted. Did I understand that correctly?
More than just reduction. I mean more about any changes.
Changes, okay.
If the person, lifetime, maybe in the United States, maybe 60 years or 100 years, but according to record, maybe just 20 or 30 years.
Okay, so it sounds like perhaps you're talking about incomplete records too as well. let me just start by saying that we don't track our FOIA requests. The Department of Justice sets forth guidelines with respect to statistics that each agency has to keep with respect to FOIA requests, for instance. And we file a report annually. And the reports that we file capture information about the number of requests, the number of redactions that we use, the types of redactions that we use, that type of information. So we keep statistical information on our requests only to answer those types of reporting requirements from the Department of Justice. We do not track our requesters. We do not track ethnicity, for instance, of our requester community. You can go, I think each of the agencies are required to post a FOIA log, and that log is posted online, and we will list each of the FOIA requests that we receive on the log to include the name of the requester. But if you are filing an A-file request, for instance, the only information that is released is the requester's name. So you could go, in other words, to our website and check our FOIA log to get some information about who typically files a FOIA request. But beyond that, we don't capture any information. I hope that answers at least part of your question. Anybody else?
Anyone else have anything to add? No? No?
I would say for the Department of State that the only reason we inquire about nationality at all or why it comes up at all is it helps us identify who the individual is the subject of the search request. When people apply for visa, they present a passport that reflects their nationality, but other than that, they're processed roughly in order with some variation for complexity. But yeah, that's about it in terms of nationality that we account for.
Okay. Question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Elaine Middleman. I've talked to Lena, and this has been very fascinating. I'm an attorney in private practice, so I have several questions, and I'll just be very brief and answer them or not answer them. One is, I'm overwhelmed by hearing all about your backlog, and so do you have a reason for that? And also, do you feel like you're going to be able to cope with that? Next question about, I don't think any of you talked about fees and fee waiver requests, which is one of my hot button issues. So if you can maybe talk about that. And then the third question is exemption 7, law enforcement agency. Do you all have a blanket policy about whether or not you're a law enforcement agency? Oh, and one more thing. I have a couple of individual questions. Would you be there afterwards? I can come up and talk to you. Okay, thanks.
All right.
Okay, so I will start since I own the biggest backlog right now at about 48,000 requests. And, our backlog, if you track the statistics, has waxed and waned over the years. As immigration becomes more of interest, I guess, in the general discourse, we see our FOIA requests come up. As you know, if you practice in this area, immigration is somewhat unique in that the process itself does not contain a discovery element. So in other words, oftentimes if you are involved in some type of court proceeding, you have access to the information via discovery. Immigration is one of the exceptions to that, in that the only way an individual can get access to information that the government has on them as they go through a court proceeding is through the Freedom of Information Act. And so clearly, we feel, although it's anecdotal, we feel that a large amount of the FOIA requests we receive are filed by individuals in some type of proceeding. And let's see, fees, that was number 2. So also, the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 changed the information or the requirements with respect to fees. So if an agency is not in compliance with all the statutory timelines, then they cannot charge fees. And because we are in a backlog, we typically do not charge for our A-file requests. We have a very small portion of our significant interest requests. If we incur direct costs, for instance, then we can pass those along. But I think last year we collected about $5,000 with respect to those types of requests. And I'm sorry, let's see, your third question? Oh, law enforcement. Okay. And USCIS is not a law enforcement agency. So we do have an element called FD&S, or fraud detection branch, and while they have some quasi-law enforcement functions, and we do withhold some of their information on a B7, typically USCIS is the benefit granting arm. So.
As for backlog, I don't know specific numbers, but I do know that generally on our case-specific requests that we're processing those more quickly than we did a couple years ago. So we put a lot of effort into that to catch up and repair what felt like a broken system. Fees, don't know. And then law enforcement agency, we do have a law enforcement component of Department of State. That's the Diplomatic Services. They have a full name that has 3 letters, and I can only remember. Diplomatic Security Services, there it is. We do, however, use the law enforcement exemption from time to time in both our policy-related requests, less so in our other requests. But part of the reason is the Immigration and Nationality Act requires us to liaise with different law enforcement offices as part of the visa adjudication process. And the other reason is the idea that in administering the Immigration and Nationality Act, that there are certain things that we would reveal, sources and methods, and how we investigate the bona fides of applicants and their stories and their eligibility. And to the extent that releasing the record would reveal those sources and methods, that is justifiably, we can use that exemption for that purpose.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Burrows with CBP. Yes, we also have a backlog. Our backlog is attributed to the increase in FOIA requests. We are trying to tackle the backlog. We're offering overtime now for our employees. And even though that the increase in FOIA requests we did receive, we do not have increase in staff. So that is pretty much the reason. And actually, we lost a couple of people. So we don't have as many as we had last year. Right now, our backlog is at 10,000 requests, but we're hoping, crossing our fingers that maybe we can try to at least cut that in half. That's our goal by the end of the fiscal year. We'll see. As far as fees, because we have the backlog, we don't charge a lot of fees because we, of course, missed the deadline of when requests have to go out the door 10 to 20 days. And law enforcement, yes, we do use law enforcement exemptions because we, the Border Patrol agents, they are law enforcement people, so we have to protect like the techniques and methods and things that they're used in their day-to-day jobs. So, thank you.
Not much to add to that. I kind of would repeat, same on the fees. There's a website you can go to. I'm not sure which site it is that has the fees charged by agency. And ICE is down there as well due to the backlog. I'd also say that the backlog waxes and wanes with ICE as well. I think it was higher a couple years ago. Katrina got it down to 0. Now it's starting to tick back up again. She's offering overtime again for her employees as well. And for B7, ICE's Immigration and Customs Enforcement is the second largest law enforcement agency in the country behind the FBI. So we certainly put B7 on our records.
Hi, so the first question was on the fees. I cannot speak of that. That's the ACF FOIA office. They probably have something online about that. Regarding the backlog, we just cleared, after the influx in 2014, we hired more people and were able to stabilize. So we don't currently have a backlog. However, the FOIA office has a backlog. The majority of the requests are for records for, or are specifically for the USC program with everything that's been happening. And they, I think, are going to be hiring more people. And as far as I do know that as far as the exemption, the B7, I have flagged some of the requests if they're related to incident happening at the shelters regarding our minors. If an incident is being investigated by CPS, for example, that I would then flag to the FOIA office and ask them to invoke that exemption, but I cannot make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the backlog, it's just, there's just such an increase in requests, the incoming and staffing. It's just a separate issue. It's a budget issue. We've tried to leverage a few things in our office. We are offering overtime. We're trying to leverage some telework. We have a thing called a maxi-flex schedule that employees can choose to be on so that they can be more productive. We also try to flex our contractors a little bit, where we can take contractors off of one project and put them on another project in order to get the FOIAs out. But there's just such an influx, and also the complexity of some of the requests coming in really require attorney attention and really require a lot of work and discussions about what's really redactable and what shouldn't be redacted. And the complexity of some of these requests coming in have just kind of taken up some of the time that we otherwise could get larger volumes of easier things done, but we have to do that. But that being said, as I mentioned, because the aliens and their attorneys, they need these records of proceedings to do their court preparation, that's always something that we're going to try to have accelerated processing for. And so that's the one place where, even though we do have a backlog, we've managed to keep it down to about 1,500 last year, which was really good considering that we had something like 15,000 more requests than the year before, but only a backlog that was 10% of that. And this year, we're just working hard, and we're going to try to get down to 0 by the end of the fiscal year. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's our goal. Our goal is to have 0 backlog at the end of the fiscal year.
Did you want to address fees?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the fees, we rarely collect fees for the reasons that have been stated. The fees that we would collect, obviously we don't collect fees from first-party requesters. When we collect fees, it will probably be from a complex requester, and we probably didn't get their request out within 20 days, so that knocks that out. And then even if we can, of course, there's all the 2016 amendments, if there's a media interest, or if the person is with the media or can credibly say that they're publicizing the results, then it's going to take down. So really, there's some commercial requesters that we've recovered fees from in the past, but we're talking hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And we're not a law enforcement agency, so the only time that we would apply with the 7E would be as if we have documents within the ROPS that are law enforcement documents. We'll either refer those documents to the agency, or if we are going to release those as part of our agreements, then we'll go ahead and apply the 7E on their behalf.
I could really only speak to the question of the fees. Because we're talking about accession records of the National Archives, our archival fee schedule applies, which is posted online, and we have a minimum fee of $20 up to 25 pages, and then I'm embarrassed to say, off the top of my head, can't remember what it is after that, but roughly 75 or 80 cents a page thereafter.
80 cents a page.
Is 80 cents a page, there you go. I don't answer a lot of references these days. And as far as the backlog, I mean, I don't work in the FOIA office. Certainly, maybe I could deflect over to you, Alina, on that. But I think if you were to talk about the National Archives backlog in relation to immigration, I really don't think you could really do that because the questions, the FOIA requests coming in apply to such a wide variety of all of our records, not just that small portion.
And NARA is decentralized in terms of its FOIA
Right.
processing. So.
My office, we have no FOIA backlog. We've had 10 all year.
Great.
Can I just,
Yeah, sure.
I've had so many frustrations, I just want to express to you, you all sound so on top of your game and professional. I'm just very impressed. So thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.
That's very nice. Let me ask the panelists one question that occurred to me as we were answering all these different questions earlier. How does the referral process work among yourselves, and especially amongst the DHS components, and how is that going? Because one of the concerns that we hear in our office in OGIS are requesters who come to us and say, we understand that our request at X agency has been processed, but there's still a number of outstanding referrals, and I feel like they've fallen into a black hole, and I don't know when they're going to come out. So that's definitely a concern that we hear from time to time. Does anyone care to address that?
Well, for CBP, we normally send out referrals a lot to USCIS when we receive requests for A files. And when we receive referrals from other agencies, it's still on a first in, first out basis.
Okay.
So since we have, unfortunately, the backlog, it takes anywhere from maybe 4 to 6 months to try to get a request out. If it's a few pages, well, with consults, we're a lot better. We have a team that looks at the consults and try to get them out within that 2-week time frame, especially when there are court dates associated with it. But majority of the referrals will go at the end of the line for us at CBP.
For ICE, I have the statistic right here. Jill's office has kindly referred 74,000 FOIA requests to ICE this year, so we thank you very much. We work together very well. We've got out about 63,000 of those, so about 10,000 in the queue.
That's great.
So for ORR, I think Jill's office referred about 7,000 pages last year. And so we decided to enter into an agreement with USCIS recently, which means they don't have to refer those same documents. What we found was that the same documents in the A files were also in the case files. So we're basically doing duplicative work. So we recently signed an MOU, and they are no longer going to be referring those pages to us, which is a great relief.
Sounds very efficient. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's where we are right now. We have the agreements, so the records of proceedings will have the I forms, and we will go ahead and release those. If we do referrals, it will probably be more in the policy arena. There are a lot of policies that look like the Executive Office of Immigration Review might be a part of that really we're not. So we do refer a lot of those policy questions out to the more appropriate agency.
Jill, do you want to address that at all?
Sure.
Since
So
you're the largest person who's sending everything out.
exactly, I'm generating business for
Generating a lot
everybody
of
else, it sounds like. So as Mata indicated, we do have an agreement with 5 different agencies to process their A-file records. So we work with CBP, with Department of State, with HHS, with Bureau of Prisons, and with OBIM. So if any of their documents are contained within the A file, we process them rather than refer them.
OBIM is?
NPPD, it's a DHS level agency. They do a lot of the U.S. visit documents. So.
Okay. Anyone else want to answer, Matt? You're standing by, okay. So we have a couple more. Let me turn over on this side of the room. If you could approach the mic and ask away.
My name is Paul Donnelly. I'm different, I suppose, from most of your customers in that when I file FOIA requests, it's generally, I'm asking how much, how many, and of what kind for information that for one reason or another is gathered but not published. I expect I am like many of your customers, and that I am often frustrated by the difficulty of getting straight answers to those kinds of questions for lots of reasons, which are not on really the fault of any FOIA officer as such. It can seem like a very disjointed process. That is, I will sometimes ask one part of DHS for data that I know they produce, I know they gather it, but for one reason or other, it's not forthcoming. I've also asked, for example, the State Department the same question, because for some reason the State Department numbers don't always agree with DHS numbers. And on simple things, like how many women get a particular visa category, which is on every I-129 form. It's right there on the third page. I know that's been requested many times by many different people, and we've never gotten an answer. I don't quite know why you're gathering the information if you won't share it with the public. Sitting up there, I thought I should ask a broader question with that in mind. How would you all fix the system so it works better?
$1 million question for everyone. Matt, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll speak to the, well, thank you for the question, Paul. And I mean, the question generally is about getting statistical information, and even though we gather the statistical information, why can't we reproduce it? And part of the reason for us is that while we collect all that information, it might be relevant in the instance of the immediate adjudication. So the individual who's applying, if they're male or female, that might be important for confirming identity and making sure that their identity documents are consistent. But in terms of what's generated for the public, we produce a report of the visa office that has the statistics that we have generally believed were of relevance or that people would be interested in. We make those we make those publicly available every fiscal year. So the example you gave, though, that we ask, are you man or a woman? And that is not, even though that data goes into the system, it's not automatically funneled into any reports that we might generate. And for that reason, in order for us to go in and give you that type of information, we have to have a programmer develop a program, or like manipulate the data to extract it, because it's not set up to do it automatically. And in that case, if you make a FOIA request along those lines, we're going in and creating a document to give you, which is not the purpose of FOIA. And so that is an obstacle that we have. While we have a lot of data, we don't need it all for that type of analysis. So if we do generate it and you ask for it, you'll get it. If we don't generate it and you ask for it, we're not going to go in and produce it to respond to the FOIA request.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. ICE collects a lot of data. We have a lot of forms. I would say that some data on forms is not inputted electronically into our electronic database. So even though it might say a certain piece of information on the form, which might be relevant on that form, it's not something that we report on, and therefore it's not ingested electronically so that we could give it to you statistically. To answer your question, how to improve the system, I'm very, the people I work with in the statistical unit for ERO are very open to working with requesters on telling you what we have, what we collect, what we report on, and getting you the statistics that we have. We do a lot of statistical FOIA responses. Again, if it's not something that we report on, we're not going to create the record. We're not going to answer a question. But if it's something that we report on that we capture, I think it just comes down to education, which is why, the whole purpose of this panel, let you know what we have, what we report on, what we collect, and then get you those records. That's how we look at it. It's not about, we collect it, but we're not going to give it to you, or we're ignoring it, or anything like that. So I'll leave it at that.
Just want to follow up on something that both Matt and Ryan mentioned, and that is that we are investing resources in our significant interest requests, which is the non-A-file type requests, to reach out to each requester as they file a FOIA request. And first of all, to acknowledge the request and say, yes, we have it. But secondly, to really have a dialogue with the requester and ask them, what information are you really looking for? We get a lot of requests that say, I want any and all documents related to ABC. And as we reach out to the requester and we say, you realize that the request that you have filed with us is going to capture emails, for instance, for a 10-year period. And the requester will say, oh, no, I don't want the emails. I'm really just interested in this narrow piece of information. So that's one thing that USCIS is doing to commit to increase our one-on-one contact with the requester community to try to narrow the scope, to really get at what the requester wants, and in turn, to then turn around to our program offices and say, this is what the requester's looking for. We're also going to ask the requester community to help us develop the search terms. So we want to use the words that you want us to use to do these searches. What are those? And then, again, feed that information back to our program offices saying, if we search for this type of record, what will we get? So hopefully you will see some improvement in that area with respect to, again, trying to narrow the scope, really focus on what it is that you want rather than receiving, 10 years worth of emails that my staff has to go through line for line and redact before we release them. And then, as it turns out, that really isn't what you were looking for to begin with.
So I'm sorry to ask if you could hold on to your thought, because we've got 3 questions online, and then we'll definitely not pass you over, I promise. Sheila, do you want to ask the online questions?
Sure. First question is from a requester who says, if USCIS has the entire A file, then why do FOIA requests for A files come back differently from USCIS, ICE, and CBP? What she means is that in one particular instance, her office sent FOIA requests to all 3 agencies, and ICE and CBP responded by saying they had no record of the alien, while USCIS provided a file that was heavily redacted.
Well, without, seeing the specific request, I'm speculating a little bit here, but it could very well be that the documents that ICE and CBP would have had were contained within the A file, and so we went ahead and processed both the CBP portion and the USCIS portion. That's probably about the best I can do in terms of a response.
The next question is, this requester's office has experienced having 3/4 of their FOIA requests to CBP closed and never responded to, and wondered why that might be.
Okay, you said that the request was closed and never responded to?
Yeah, apparently she says that her office has, about 3/4 of the requests that her office sends to CBP are just closed and there's no response.
Was it a no record? I'm not sure. because we won't just close a response without responding. So whether we had no records or if it was referred to another agency, but we won't just close out a request without responding. So whether it's with records or stating that we didn't have records and it's a no record response, or it's insufficient if we needed more information, but we don't just close out a request and not respond.
Who should this requester contact if she has that question or she believes that?
She can call the CBP office, 202-325-0150.
Okay.
But I would like to add too, we did upgrade our system for you online. So it's going through the migration stages now. And
Okay.
everything is supposed to be migrated by September the 30th. So it has been a lot of hiccups in the last maybe 2 months. But other than that, that would be the only time I will see that maybe it might have been an issue, but we never close out anything without responding to a request.
Okay, that might be it because she's saying it's not a no record, it's an online system is showing it's closed. So that might be what it is. Next question is, will CBP ever refuse to provide a copy of an expedited removal order that has been requested via FOIA?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Will CBP ever refuse to provide a copy of an expedited removal order that has been requested via FOIA?
We won't, no, we won't refuse to provide anything. I don't.
In response to a first-party request.
Right, correct.
Is this a third-party request?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll try to contact that person, but that's all I have.
Okay. All right, you're up.
It's a tricky spot here. Hi, my name is Renee Carl. I'm a professional genealogist. This has been really useful. And my question is for Jill and Patrick regarding A-files. And can you talk a little bit more about the process for this 100-year birthday and the transfer of the A-file from USCIS to the National Archives, and how long do you estimate that that transfer process actually takes? Is there a limbo period in which these documents sit while they're being accessioned? And are you relying solely on Ancestry.com to create your indexes?
You want to start?
Okay, I'll start just because my part's a little bit smaller, I think. So one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that our FOIA program office just took over the genealogy function for USCIS in January of this year. And so as you may know, the genealogy program is separate from FOIA. It is a fee-for-service type service that we offer, and it applies to A files under 8 million, for instance, the A number, along with some C files and some, I think, alien registration forms as well. But really, that's the extent of my involvement with the genealogy program. So if you're looking for an ancestors record, for instance, you can file with our genealogy branch and get copies of index cards or any records that we may have. And then, as Patrick mentioned, I think once the individual A file, the subject of the record, his birth date is in excess of 100 years, that's when the records are accessioned over to NARA.
Right. And with this answer, please understand that I work in Philadelphia, not Kansas City, so that I'm going to be quite limited in what I have to say, but I will apply general knowledge of what we do with other records to these particular records. First of all, they're transferred in clumps. A transfer, I couldn't tell you how big it would be. Could be 1 box, could be 400 boxes. It really just depends on how the agency was holding them to begin with. We don't have any power over that. When the records are available for disposal, and I say disposal meaning transferred to us, not destroyed, then the agency will offer them, will accept them. In this particular case, they are moved from how far away? Within the same facility, really, from one side to the other. And at that point, depending on the other records that are transferred to NARA that year, or that particular office in that year, they would be minimally processed to a point where each individual file is available in the catalog, meaning you'll have an A number, individual's name, and a date of birth, enough for you to go ahead and isolate who you need and then go ahead and make that request. But again, each office does accession quite a bit of a different amount of material, and each year the amount of material is quite different as well. But if you had more specific questions about that, the folks in Kansas City or even in San Bruno, because they also hold A files, would be more than happy to talk about it with you.
So Jill, I wanted to follow up just a little. I'm not asking about the genealogy program. I'm asking about the A files that are currently under your administration. And as they've reached this 100-year birth date and roll over into either the genealogy program and or into the transfer to NARA. So I'm not asking about how the genealogy program works. I'm asking what's the system that USCIS uses to identify and move these A files from one section to another?
Okay, so with respect to the genealogy program, the records do not have to be older than 100 years. So it's just whether or not the A file falls below that 8 million mark, for instance. When USCIS set up the genealogy program, they identified, for instance, A files below 8 million would be part of the genealogy program. There's really no transfer involved there between FOIA and genealogy because the records are typically housed there at the National Records Center together. So really the only transfer as such is at that 100-year mark when they are transferred or accessioned over to NARA. And it is, my understanding is it's a matter of going through and compacting files. When they get a box that's full, then they do some type of master list that lists all the files, and then they are physically transferred in an electronic system and then put on a flatbed truck and moved across the cave to the archives. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so we're actually 3 minutes over time. I just want to thank all the panelists again. Please join me in a round of applause to